All right, continuing on Mao's On Contradiction, Part 3, the particularity of contradiction. Here to read to you in our soothing voices is me, AW, Hyperion, and this guy with a green man avatar whose name I don't know.
Ah, thanks.
It's Joshua.
I don't know who the green man in the avatar is.
I don't either, but the man behind the mask is Joshua.
Oh, you mean the Green Man and the Avatar?
Yeah.
Well, people have said it's like the Green Giant or it's Green Jesus, Green Marx, Green Socrates, whatever. So I guess
Why does that
that's
look
what
like
it is.
Jesus? Or Socrates?
I don't know, it's a green guy. He has a beard, so.
Alright, so last time I frankly learned fuck all from Mao, but let's see if we learned something from this time. And disclaimer before people continue to say this. I'm not a Maoist. We're not a Maoist. We're not Leninist either.
We are
so
not a Maoist.
we don't care about what Mao and his ideology actually is. We're not here to critique it from within. So yeah.
Yeah, this is an external critique of the logic.
This
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
a self-criticism.
Oh god. As if Mao self-criticized. Come on. Anyways, yeah, we did this reading because someone said, Mao's really Hegelian, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, as far as we've read, whoever said that, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. He basically rejects Hegel. Not rejects, but says, okay, well, Marx improved upon Hegel. Lenin and Stalin improved upon Marx.
And I'm improving
I'm
upon
improving
both.
upon them.
And so if you're gonna come in the comments and say, well, you're misunderstanding him because you haven't read Lenin. One, I don't give a fuck, because Lenin is not Marx. And you haven't read Stalin. Two, I don't give a fuck, because Stalin is not Marx. And we're talking about dialectical materialism. I don't give a fuck, because dialectical materialism is bullshit.
Comrade, have you read Stalin's book on dialectical materialism?
No,
I did.
no, I have
Frankly,
not.
I just see it as a ridiculous simplification of Lenin.
Yeah.
But my translation seemed weird. It seemed like it was translated from a different language that isn't Russian into another, like from Russian into like some Asiatic language, and then translated from that into English. It was a very weird translation.
Was it like in
Probably.
English?
No, no, it just
Probably.
said it looked like a Chinese menu at a restaurant, kind of, But that's neither here nor there. I just the content wasn't there either, so let's try to read
Yeah.
this and see.
So, straight to the point, I at least don't give a shit about dialectical materialism or materialist dialectics. I don't care what you call it. It's a nonsense philosophy to me. It's always been a nonsense philosophy. I've never bought into it, even in my most Marxist of days. And before you come and tell me you haven't read Marx, fuck you, yes I have. And I've read Marx, not just like, oh, I read Marx, I read Capital. No, I've read Marx. I got my notes, buddy. I got my arguments outlined. Come at me, bro.
Marx wasn't even a materialist. He just said
Yeah,
it because that was the popular thing of the day.
Yeah, there's a
and
quote from the
also
1844 manuscripts where he just says, yeah, I could call myself a naturalist. Yeah, that'd probably make more sense.
to posit the phrase "you have not read Marx." It assumes that Marx is consistent in his entire life, which is not the case at all. And this is just a gross simplification of Marx.
Oh yeah, people's like, I read
But-
Marx and I can spew my bullshit and I can spew also text and cite things at you. Well, good for you, buddy. So do Jesus freaks. You know how much I care about their arguments? Not one bit. Like, I don't care if I don't know this specific verse from the Bible where, they say this specific thing. Doesn't matter to me. Arguments and structures, and that's all there is to it. I don't care about definitions. I don't care what you say you think you're saying. I care about what you actually say. So here, we care about what Marx actually says
Mao.
and what Mao is actually saying about what Marx actually says. So we'll leave it at that. Now let's get to it.
All right.
Part 3, the particularity of contradiction. Contradiction is present in the process of development of all things. It permeates the process of development of each thing from beginning to end. This is the universality and absoluteness of contradiction, which we have discussed above. Now let us discuss the particularity and relativity of contradiction. Well, thank you for just saying it for like the 4th time and not really showing it. But, we'll see.
Okay, Joshua, what do you think he means by contradiction? Do you have an interpretation? Because so far I'm just seeing it as conflict.
Well, I wasn't here for the previous one,
Yeah.
so I'm not sure exactly what he means by contradiction.
Well, he
I'm
doesn't.
sure
explain.
he doesn't mean the same thing as like Hegel's contradiction.
Oh, he definitely doesn't seem to mean the same thing. And I agree. It does seem to be more about conflict, which seems to be very much in line with the general stuff I know about Mao.
Do you think Mao's read Hegel?
He claimed to have. He even
claimed
had a
to.
he had a quote unquote discussion about Hegel with Kissinger.
So maybe I wouldn't be surprised if he did. I mean, it's not like, ooh, wow, that's so rare. But I mean, it's one thing to read and it's another thing to read.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, he quoted Hegel saying freedom means the knowledge of necessity to Kissinger.
Shit.
Yeah.
Was Kissinger not
No,
indoctrinated?
Kissinger knew of Hegel. Obviously, he was against communism or whatever, but yeah, he had read Hegel too.
All right, continuing. This problem should be studied on several levels. First, the contradiction in each form of motion of matter has its particularity. Man's knowledge of matter is knowledge of its form of motion, because there is nothing in this world except matter and motion, and this motion must assume certain forms. Well, there is an dogmatic metaphysical statement, if there ever was one. Continuing, in considering each form of motion of matter, we must observe the points which it has in common with other forms of motion. But what is especially important and necessary, constituting as it does the foundation of our knowledge of a thing, is to observe what is particular to this form of motion or of matter, namely, to observe the qualitative difference between this form of motion and other forms. Only when we have done so can we distinguish between things. No. There's plenty of other ways you can distinguish between things without relying on motion and matter. Quality, for example, has nothing to do with motion and matter. And we can totally differentiate things that aren't moving. Sorry, Mao. Continuing. Every form of motion contains within itself its own particular contradiction. Okay. This particular contradiction constitutes a particular essence which distinguishes one thing from another. It is the internal cause, or, as it may be called, the basis for the immense variety of things in the world. So, it seems to me here he's utterly, if he's referring to anything Hegelian at all, he's utterly confusing quote-unquote logical motion with, like, actual material physical motion. And
That's what I was thinking.
they are not the same thing at all. Like
Yeah.
the term motion for thinking is just kind of using a regular term, as an analogical thing. Logic isn't Thoughts, for example, don't move as matter in motion.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that with the first quote in this section when he said contradiction is the present and so on and so on, the development of whole things. I was thinking like, you know, this sounds kind of Hegelian, but I'm sure he doesn't mean anything Hegelian.
Yeah, it
He
sounds
means it
very
like
much
in
like
a
concepts.
more literal sense, not like the development of concepts. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and also reminds me of like the difference in identity.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with motion, and yes, that's a real
Yeah.
contradiction. To continuing, it is the internal cause, or as it may be called, the basis for the immense variety of things in the world. There are many forms of motion in nature: mechanical motion, sound, light, heat, electricity, dissociation, combination, and so on. The fuck? How's dissociation and combination of motion? That's a relation. It's a conceptual thing. All these forms are interdependent, but in its essence, each is different from the others. The particular
It
essence of
relies on
each
the
form of motion.
It relies upon the others, but not really.
Yeah, no. The particular essence of each form of motion is determined by its own particular contradiction. This holds true not only for nature, but also for social and ideological phenomena. Every form of society, every form of ideology has its own particular contradiction and particular essence. That seemed like a really roundabout and repetitive paragraph to just literally say one single thing. Everything has its own particular contradiction, particular essence, without explaining why.
It just sounds like this kind of propaganda, quote unquote, science. Like he uses big words, he phrases things in a, you know, sophisticated looking manner, but it has no content.
That's, god damn it, you hit on something I hadn't even thought about. Sophistry. This is sophistry. He says a lot without saying very much at all.
He's been doing this the whole time.
God damn it, Plato was right.
I mean, it's like when you're a leader and you want people to, you know, think you're a competent leader, especially like in these, you know, Marxist countries, you have to know your dialectics or whatever. You have to write shit like this. You have to be a sophist.
Alright, continuing. The sciences are differentiated precisely on the basis of particular contradictions inherent in their respective objects of study. Thus, the contradiction peculiar to a certain field of phenomena constitutes the object of study for a specific branch of science. For example, positive and negative numbers in mathematics, action and reaction in mechanics, positive and negative electricity in physics, dissociation and combination in chemistry, forces of production and relations of production, classes and class struggle in social science, offense and defense in military science, idealism and materialism, the metaphysical outlook or the dialectical outlook in philosophy, and so on. All these are objects of study or different branches of science, precisely because each branch has its own particular contradiction and particular essence. Well, okay, I get the example. It's totally wrong because I don't think I don't think these are the essential contradictions of any of these. Like the essential contradiction of mathematics of quantity is not between positive and negative numbers. Action, reaction, mechanics is not the central contradiction or the prime contradiction that begins at all, like the germ, which is the commodity for capitalism. Positive and negative electricity isn't the only contradiction in physics. Quite a few and quite a lot more, even by his time. But I'm pretty sure he had no idea about relativity and whatnot, or quantum mechanics. Yeah. By dissociation combination, he meant chemistry. Okay, so I get it now. He wasn't talking about like the general kind, which I thought was what he meant. Forces of
Idealism,
production.
materialism
Yeah,
are
those
not
aren't. They are not like. They are not actually contradictions in philosophy. Like,
contradictions at all.
I mean, like, has this guy not ever heard of monism? Like, monism is not materialistic nor idealistic. Monism, like there's neutral monism, for example, which doesn't give a shit about the whole distinction. There's naturalism, which is basically a pansy's version of materialism, which also doesn't care about the distinction. There's far more fundamental contradictions to philosophy, but idealism and materialism is not one of them.
Yeah.
Like you look at most of these so-called contradictions, you look at through philosophy, and if you actually learn the real philosophies being compared, uh, most of the problems are problems of communication. Like, it's not these people are talking about completely different outlooks which are just utterly incompatible. No, they actually usually are compatible. It's just, the level of compatibility. And,
Yeah, and
how much
the
people are willing to
stretches.
cede the
Yeah,
concepts.
the stretches you have to go to make them compatible. So yeah, there are far more contradictions in our world than are dreamt of in Mao's philosophy.
And some things just aren't really contradictory.
Yeah.
Like, we all here know materialism is an idealism. Come on. Doesn't
Wait, what was
matter
that? Sorry.
that we all here know that materialism is an idealism.
Yeah.
And likewise, like Berkeley's idealism, not Hegel's, of course, but Berkeley's idealism is a materialism, pretty much.
Actually, yeah, it could be interpreted as such. Like Berkeley's just weird. Like when you finally I haven't read him directly, but I've listened to some lectures about him, and I've read some short articles about him. And once you start getting like why he thought about it, it doesn't seem insane at all. And it's just like he could have just called it, instead of ideas, like just matter. I mean, it's like Leibniz. Leibniz is an atomist, and yet he's an idealist. How does that work? Doesn't that usually make you think that an atomist would be a materialist? Yeah, that would be the usual assumption, but that's not how it actually works.
Yeah,
So
but
this
that's how
whole distinction.
materialists want to claim Leibniz as their own.
Do they?
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose
yeah.
if they didn't know what the hell his general philosophy actually was, they would think he's a materialist. He actually isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Which is Leibniz had just some fascinating ideas about infinity and infinitude, which are pretty fascinating, pretty great. But continuing.
Yeah.
Of course, unless we understand the universality of contradiction, we have no way of discovering the universal cause or universal basis for the movement or development of things. However, unless we study the particularity of contradiction, we have no way of determining the particular essence of a thing which differentiates it from other things. No way of discovering the particular cause or particular basis for the movement or development of a thing, and no way of distinguishing one thing from another or of demarcating the fields of science. Well, okay, that was decent and good enough. Basically, the point is, yeah, there may be a universal form, but for particular things, we got to know the specific form of that universal.
Sure.
Continuing, as regards the sequence in the movement of man's knowledge, there is always a gradual growth from the knowledge of individual and particular things to the knowledge of things in general. Only after man knows the particular essence of many different things can he perceive the generalization and know the common essence of things.
Well,
that's a pretty cavemanish thing to say.
Yeah, and also not true empirically, because people try to generalize before they know the particulars in individuals anyway. But yeah, I agree that they should ideally recognize the individual and particular things before trying to give a general knowledge.
I don't know. From a Hegelian standpoint, Hegel would utterly disagree. Hegel says it's impossible. Like, Hegel would agree with Hume that it's impossible to go from an individual. If we had this true distinction between individuals and universals, you cannot generalize. It's impossible. It doesn't make sense. Induction just is a logical leap, which has no justification. So when you think you're generalizing, yeah, you may be generalizing, but if you wanted to make a valid concept of contradictions, of inner contradiction at least, you would have to have not a generalization, you would have to have a real universal.
Yeah.
Like-
you cannot generalize because then you're not considering the true universal, which is comprised of its particulars and individuals.
Mhm. Continuing, when man attains the knowledge of this common essence, he uses it as a guide and proceeds to study various concrete things which have not yet been studied, or studied thoroughly, and to discover the particular essence of each. Only thus is he able to supplement, enrich, and develop his knowledge of the common essence and prevent such knowledge from withering or petrifying. Okay, kind of trying to describe scientific praxis. These are the two processes of cognition, one from the particular to the general, and the other from the general to the particular. Thus, cognition moves in cycles, and so long as scientific method is strictly adhered to, each cycle advances human knowledge a step higher, and so makes it more and more profound. Where our dogmatists err on this question is that, on the one hand, they do not understand that we have to study the particularity of contradiction and know the particular essence of individual things before we can adequately know the universality of contradiction and the common essence of things, and that, on the other hand, they do not understand that after knowing the common essence of things, we must go further and study the concrete things that have not yet been thoroughly studied, or have only just emerged. Our dogmatists are lazy bones. They refuse to undertake any painstaking study of concrete things that regard general truths that are emerging out of the void. They turn them into purely abstract, unfathomable formulas, and thereby completely deny and reverse the normal sequence by which man comes to know truth. Nor do they understand the interconnection of the two processes in cognition, from the particular to the general, and then from the general to the particular. They understand nothing of the Marxist theory of knowledge. Well, they understand nothing because Marx pretty much had no theory of knowledge that he ever laid out.
Yeah,
I should know this because I fucking was fascinated by this question for a while, and I read quite a bit on it, and the general consensus was, yeah, there's an implicit theory of knowledge. There never was an explicit theory of knowledge, and what Marx said explicitly was all over the board. Because there were times in which Marx seemed to be just going with what Mao says, we begin with particulars, and then we generalize. And in other places, he's like, no, we begin with the totality, and then, we derive the particulars. Only then could we understand the particulars. So, I can kind of see where Mao's coming from, though I don't know what was available to him at the time, if the German ideology was... Yeah, the German ideology must have been available.
In Russian, it was, I think. Yeah, definitely in Russian and German.
Yeah, but maybe not in Chinese. I don't know. In Mandarin, I guess.
But either way, I mean, Mao's wrong here, at least as far as if we're trying to compare him to Hegel. Wrong.
Yeah, his type
from
of
the Hegelian
dialectical
standpoint.
movement is like just taking thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and positing the synthesis as the higher level thing, and then it becomes more and more profound, as he says. And then, again, taking a generalization is a step backwards, because once you know the true universal, why would you want to then generalize, unless he means something different by generalize, and I'm just taking it from my linguistic perspective of not liking generalizations.
I don't think so. I think the translators definitely chose generalization for the generalization. In Hegel, even if you start with an individual, you don't generalize up to universal. It's not how it happens. You derive the universal from within.
Yeah, I'm just trying to not use my biases against Mao.
Well, I mean, as far as like using normal words, I'm just going to assume he means normal things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out his insult, where he calls the dogmatists lazy bones. I like that.
Yeah.
You are a lazy bone.
Do you think it literally translated from that in Chinese to English?
Yeah, but it's one of those cultural things where it just sounds better in their own language, and it makes more sense.
Yeah, it probably does. Who
It's
even are
it's
the dogmatists that he's referring to, do you think?
people in his party. So obviously people in his party. You know, he's writing this against certain currents in Chinese Marxism in his day. So I don't know anything about that history, so I can't say who they are, but it's pretty easy to assume it's the people in his party. So he's obviously not writing to the Russians, like at that point, don't like they have tensions, you know, between the Soviets and the Chinese.
When was this written?
I don't know. Go to the top.
37.
37. Oh, okay. No,
37?
never mind.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, never mind.
this is early.
I think this might have been during the revolution.
This was way during the revolution.
Yeah, this is before the revolution.
I mean, I think like China was already kind of destabilized internally, but like there was basically a multitude of warlords trying to vie for power.
Yeah, the Long March had already happened, but
Had Japan invaded yet? Well, I mean, they'd invaded tons of times in the past, but I mean, during the revolution.
I don't know, and let's leave that for some other discussion. Let's continue. It is necessary not only to study the particular contradiction, the essence determined thereby of every great system of the forms of motion of matter, but also to study the particular contradiction, the essence of each process in the long course of development of each form of motion of matter. In every form of motion, each process of development, which is real and not imaginary, is qualitatively different. Our study must emphasize and start from this point. This obsession with matter, I mean, it's like for a guy who says he just doesn't like metaphysics, he sure loves to talk in grand metaphysical terms. I mean, like, I can tell you, I never woke up in a single day of my life and go, you know, I really care about matter. I really want to know about matter. You know, I really need to understand matter today.
Well, no, obviously the solution to metaphysics is just things are made of atoms. Like, it's the only possible solution there could be, obviously.
If only we knew what matter was. What's the matter with matter, anyways, huh?
there has to be a book called What's the Matter with Matter?
There is. Alright, continuing. Qualitatively different contradictions can only be resolved by qualitatively different methods. For instance, the contradiction between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie is resolved by the method of socialist revolution. The contradiction between the great masses of the people and the feudal system is resolved by the method of democratic revolution. The contradiction between the colonies and imperialism is resolved by the method of national revolutionary war. The contradiction between the working class and the peasant class in socialist society is resolved by the method of collectivization, mechanization, and agriculture. Contradiction within the Communist Party is resolved by the method of criticism and self-criticism. The contradiction between society and nature is resolved by the method of developing the productive forces. That's I take these to all be pseudo-dialectics for the most part. Not that, you know, these things aren't contradictory, but like this resolution he's talking about, it's pseudo-dialectics. It's not actually sublating or logically following of any kind.
It's not even a synthesis.
Like,
It's
yeah.
just one side taking over the other.
Or, you know, it's just a completely different shift. I mean, it goes with what he's not contradicting what he's said from himself. You know, he says qualitatively different contradictions can only be resolved by qualitatively different methods. If we take that to be that the problem of one quality can only be resolved by shifting the quality. That way you resolve the contradiction by dissolving the very basis which makes the contradiction. If the problem is that your stupid kids just can't share apples, well, you gotta give them oranges. But that's not dialectics. For example, the contradiction between the great masses of people and the feudal system are resolved by the method of democratic revolution. Like, that's not a resolution in the sense of like, we came to a conclusion of how to fix things. No, it's literally just like, your friends are fighting over a house, bunker mansion, and they all say I own this, and the other one's like, no, I own this, and some other guy comes like, come on guys, we all own this, and some other guy comes, what? Fuck bunker, fuck bunker mansion, and blows it up and says, there you go, contradiction solved. And everybody's like, well, yeah, problem solved. Now nobody owns it. No house, no problem. That's basically how this is working. I mean, proletariat and bourgeoisie, hey, socialist revolution, blow up capitalism. No capitalism, no problem. Not dialectics. People and feudal lords, hey, no feudalism, no problem. Contradiction between colonies and imperialism resolved by the method of national revolutionary war. Hey, no imperialism, no problem. The contradiction between the working class and the peasant class in social society is resolved by the method of collectivization and mechanization in agriculture. Hey, no independent peasants, no problem. Contradiction within the Communist Party is resolved by the method of criticism and self-criticism. And by criticism, they mean literally kicking out everybody who disagrees. Hey, no dissent, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the contradiction between society and nature is resolved by the method of developing the productive forces. If we can beat nature with a stick, no problem. There is no special thought process to this. This is such a basic thing. You know how many people said this kind of shit before?
Literally tens.
Literally dozens. There were dozens of us in the past. But seriously though, this is not something unique to Marxists. You guys aren't the only ones who have this grand understanding that, hey, if you get rid of the problem, the thing that causes the problem, you got no problems.
Literally what capitalists think.
What does this even have to do with dialectics? It's just like saying two things are opposed to each other. How do we get rid of the conflict? Take out one of them.
Take out one of them, or take out what they're conflicting about.
Remove the people from the factories who are saying, hey, we should be striking.
Okay. No people,
because we're not
no
making
problems.
as much money as the CEO.
If your wife is nagging at you all day, don't worry.
Okay.
No wife, no problem. Or your son.
Let's not get into
or your
stand-up.
dog.
Oh, maybe Stalin, he really liked this dialectic. You have the people of the motherland, then you have the people who don't like the motherland. Put them in gulag. Problem solved.
Pretty much. Hey, are people rising up against you? Just put them in gulags. No people in the streets rioting, no problem. That is dialectics. I mean, there is no explanation of a shift here. And literally all the things he's talking about, like the peasants and the workers, that's not a dialectical contradiction. That's just a conflict of interest. Actually, what follows right now is a perfect example. In Russia, there was a fundamental difference between the contradiction resolved by the February Revolution and the contradiction resolved by the October Revolution, as well as between the methods used to resolve them. The principle of using different methods to resolve different contradictions is one which Marxist-Leninists must strictly observe. It's called pragmatism. I'm sorry, there's nothing special about this. It's pragmatism. You gotta be an idiot not to know to do this. Hitler did this. Hitler wasn't a dialectical materialist.
No, he was. He understand the contradiction between the great Aryan people and
and
the
the
Jews.
Jewish menace.
So he removed the Jews.
Yeah. The eternal Jew.
He was the great dialectical materialist, AW. I don't know how you don't understand this.
Hitler was a
like,
pragmatist. So was Lenin. And
yeah,
it's not
dude,
bad to be a pragmatist.
yeah, no, it's not bad. You have to
just
be
not
if you're
a
gonna succeed in
huge
real
point.
life. You got to be a pragmatist because that's the real thing. The world is not actually logical. That's one of the things that Hegel actually
Yeah.
brings to the fore. He says the reason you can't fucking theorize the real world, is because the real world is a fucking mess. It's not
Yeah,
like your
you
little
have to-
fantasies and dreams of logic.
Yeah, you have to sort of impose logic upon the material reality, upon the physical, empirical reality.
So, when he's talking about these contradictions, okay, they're contradictions in the sense of like oppositions and, conflicts. They're not contradictions in the Hegelian sense of like this inner necessity of like, this is absolutely opposed to that from within. One exists, the other can't exist. Like the existence of workers and peasants in the same country is a historical contingent thing. It has nothing to do with the necessity of capitalism or socialism. Literally, like, there can be no theory, for example, or a general theory that can be applied from like Russian Revolution to other places, because no other place has the conditions which they had. And it's not about dialectical conditions, it's just standard conditions. But anyways, let's see. The dogmatists do not observe this principle. They do not understand that conditions differ in different kinds of revolution, and so do not understand that different methods should be used to resolve different contradictions. On the contrary, they invariably adopt what they imagine to be an unalterable formula and arbitrarily apply it everywhere, which only causes setbacks to the revolution or makes a sorry mess of what was really well done. Well, Mao, I agree. Like, damn right, damn straight. That is exactly what you do when it comes to reality. You don't take, it's like, well, the Marxist-Leninist formula for politics is this. We have to do this. But you live in the U.S. If you're printing out Trotskyite newspapers, you're an idiot. If you're going around shouting with a megaphone and you're talking about the people's will and, land, peace, and bread, and that, we must dismantle imperialism from within, you're an idiot. Because you're literally, you're not being pragmatic. You're not adjusting yourself to your conditions of action,
Marx obviously said that the conditions of the movement result from the premises now in existence.
Nice. So definitely see, Mao was a good Marxist there.
Yeah.
If I could clap without dropping this microphone, I'd give him a little clap. Good job, Mao. Alright, continuing. In order to reveal the particularity of the contradictions in any process in the development of a thing, in their totality or interconnections, that is, in order to reveal the essence of the process, it is necessary to reveal the particularity of the two aspects of each of the contradictions in that process. Otherwise, it will be impossible to discover the essence of the process. This likewise requires the utmost attention in our study. It's so weird that he goes between these shifts of like, we gotta understand the totality, the totality of interconnections and the essential contradiction of the development of things, and then literally in the last paragraph it's fuck that whole totality development of things. We gotta know what the specific conditions are right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying like this is a contradiction. It's not like Mao is wow, Mao just contradicted himself. No, it's a different perspective for different things. So, there's the purely pragmatic perspective, and then there's like the long-term theoretical perspective. And they go together, but they don't quite ever fully coincide in practice. Because, for example, you may know, obviously, that, you may be a great theory anon, and you read Capital, all 3 volumes, and you know for a fact, absolutely, that capitalism, is just get doomed from within. but that has nothing to do with like your own practical situations of how you're going to do something about being anti-capitalistic, about generating the possibility of communism or socialism. Eat the conscious aspect of life. Continuing, there are many contradictions in the course of development of any major thing. For instance, in the course of China's bourgeois democratic revolution, where the conditions are exceedingly complex, there exists a contradiction between all the oppressed classes in Chinese society and imperialism, the contradiction between the great masses of the people and feudalism, the contradiction between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and the contradiction between the peasantry and the urban petty bourgeoisie on the one hand, and the bourgeoisie on the other, the contradiction between the various reactionary ruling groups, and so on. So, yeah,
He just said that.
absolutely, contradiction means conflict. And
Yeah.
that's really what it means.
Yeah, he said the same exact thing.
Yeah, he
like,
just keeps repeating
a few
things.
paragraphs earlier. Does he just do this constantly?
Yeah, he's done it.
He's
Part
done a
one.
bit. But continuing, these contradictions cannot be treated in the same way since each has its own particularity. I almost said patriarchy. Each has its own patriarchy, you shit lord.
The patriarchal Maoists.
Mao was a patriarch.
I know. I've read the quotations from Mao Zedong.
Except, it was also, I also, like, I think I read, I don't know much. It was being a long time since I read anything, but, like, didn't, like, Madame Mao, like, she was also, like, power hungry and, like, had him by the balls, too.
Yeah, she was one of the Gang of Four, I think. She was either in league with them or she was a member, right?
Yeah, she was a member, I think.
Is it Ching? Ching, I think.
Was she like the bass player or something?
Not the band Gang of Four, the actual Gang of Four after Mao died.
Well, yeah, I know. Obviously.
Yeah, I know. I'm just clarifying for your joke. Maybe like all of our listeners won't realize that there's a band called Gang of Four.
Alright, but let's continue.
Yeah.
These contradictions cannot be treated in the same way since each has its own particularity. Moreover, the two aspects of each contradiction cannot be treated in the same way since each aspect has its own characteristics. We who are engaged in the Chinese Revolution should not understand the particularity of these contradictions in their totality. Should not only understand the particularity of these contradictions in their totality, that is, in their interconnections, but should also study the two aspects of each contradictions as the only means of understanding the totality. Okay, sounds pretty Hegelian, but when we speak of understanding each of the aspects of a contradiction, we mean understanding what specific position each aspect occupies, what concrete forms it assumes, its interdependence, and its contradiction with its opposite, and what concrete methods are employed in the struggle with its opposite, when the two are both interdependent and in contradiction, and also after the interdependence breaks down. So, once again, you're repeating the same thing. Now, I'm certain of it. Mao is just not talking about Hegelian or Marxist type dialectics at all. He's talking about just like conflicts of empirical things.
He's talking about
like for example, like Mao would be the kind of guy.
result.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Hyperion, like I didn't
What?
hear.
Oh. He's talking about like two, historical history being due to conflicts of nations, forces, and things like that. Literally, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, revolution opposed by reaction, and the synthesis is this new social order or whatever.
I don't know if I would say he's going with the synthesis here, but he definitely has the thesis antithesis aspect.
Yeah, that, and then like they resolve on a higher plane, right? I mean, he calls it a higher plane, and then from that, the new synthesis is itself a thesis, and so on. That's how I'm reading it.
I don't know. I don't see it as.
I mean,
he
hasn't gotten to that at this part, but before he was.
I don't know. I don't see it as a higher plane because his examples are just like, well, we just changed the question. We could say, in a Hegelian sense, we could say, it's a higher plane, but in this sense, it just seems to be, an abstract negation
Well,
of it.
sorry.
We just get rid of the conditions.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of read it. I've been reading ahead, I guess, so I'm putting the cart before the horse, but we can go on.
It kind of seems like he just read something about Marx's concept of class conflict and decided that's what all dialectics are.
Yeah.
Or that even
Maybe. I
class
mean, like, this is
conflict.
early stuff, so if it's even more likely that he didn't read it, because like there's people I don't know anything, so I'm just talking pure rumors basically here. I've read stuff on Lefty Poll where people said that like Mao apparently didn't actually read Capital until like really late, if he ever read it at all.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't
I've
be
heard that
surprised
too,
if
but who
I
knows?
wouldn't be surprised, if that was the case. If he just kind of read like some pamphlets or stuff and basically just went off that. Which, by the way, kudos to him, I guess, for
Yeah,
like
if he
being able
did.
to take it this far.
Yeah.
Because pretty.
I was gonna say it's impressive.
Yeah, I've also heard similar shit, like he pretended to have read Capital once when he actually didn't. It probably wasn't even in Chinese anyways.
But anyways, now I see where these morons like Smoke Up the Weed come up with their silly ideas of contradictions of, like a door opening and closing. It's like, hey, it's in opposition, as the door gets closer to shutting, it's opposed, it's in conflict to, the opened emptiness, of the door. Or better yet, a bat to your face is in contradiction to your face. Hey, it's a contradiction. It's a conflict not just of interest, but of material integrity. And one of them will win if it's not stopped. Usually the bat.
Well, there's the contradiction of Trotsky's book, The ABCs of Dialectical Materialism, and Stalin's book on dialectical materialism, and it's resolved through Mao's article on contradiction.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say it was resolved with an ice pick.
No, that is what
Oh
Matt would
yeah,
say.
I should have said that. I should have said that.
Yeah, that is absolutely how it was resolved. No Trotsky, no problem. Well, anyways, another one would be, there is a contradiction between penis going inside your anus. But I'm sure our gay
Wait, what?
our gay anons don't care.
Oh yeah, that's not a conflict.
Oh, it is a conflict, according to Christians.
Yeah, but it's a conflict inside of your mind. It's not a.
Does
just
I don't know. I don't know, man. I'm pretty sure anus resists being penetrated by a penis. It's not. It's not meant to.
All right, go on.
I think it like bleeds a little.
Okay, enough.
You started this. You can't blame
Continuing.
Josh.
It is of great importance to study these problems. Lenin meant just this when he said that the most essential thing in Marxism, the living soul of Marxism, is the concrete analysis of concrete contradictions. Our dogmatists have violated Lenin's teachings, and they also probably violated Lenin. They never used their brains to analyze anything concretely, and in their writings and speeches they always use stereotypes devoid of content, thereby creating very bad style of work in our party. Considering most of what you've written so far, buddy, I think that applies exactly to you.
He's like talking about.
Like, most of this has been nothing but generalities.
He's complaining about dogmatists throughout the article, yet he's a dogmatist.
Or at least he writes like one. I mean, like the pragmatist stuff I can totally agree with. And
This is a long part. We should like speed through it. Or this recording is going to be very long.
Alright. In studying a problem, we must shun subjectivity, one-sidedness, and superficiality. To be subjective means not to look at problems objectively, that is, not to use a materialist viewpoint of looking at problems. I have discussed this in my essay on practice. To be one-sided means not to look at problems all-sidedly. For example, to understand only China but not Japan, only the Communist Party but not the Kuomintang, only the proletariat but not the bourgeoisie, only the peasants but not the landlords, only the favorable conditions but not the difficult ones, only the past but not the future, only the individual parts but not the whole, only the defects but not the achievements, only the plaintiff's case but not the defendant's, only underground revolutionary work but not open revolutionary work, and so on. In a word, it means not to understand the characteristics of both aspects of a contradiction. This is what we mean by looking at a problem one-sidedly. Or maybe because seeing the part but not the whole, seeing the trees but not the forest. That way, it is impossible to find the method for resolving a contradiction. It is impossible to accomplish the task of the revolution, to carry out assignments well, or to develop inter-party ideological struggle correctly. Okay, I agree. Nothing to do with Marxism, by the way. Nothing to do with dialectics. This is just regular pragmatism.
Yeah.
When Sun Tzu said in discussing military science, know the enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles with no danger of defeat, he was referring to the two sides in a battle. Wei Chengyi of the Tang Dynasty also understood the error of one-sidedness when he said, listen to both sides and you will be enlightened. Heed only one side and you will be benighted. But our comrades often look at problems one-sidedly, and so they often run into snags. In the novel Shui Hu Chuan, Song Xiang thrice attacked Shu village. Twice he was defeated because he was ignorant of the local conditions and used the wrong method. Later he changed his method. First he investigated the situation, and he familiarized himself with the maze of roads. Then he broke up the alliance between the Li, Hu, and Shu villages, and sent his men in disguise into the enemy camp to lie in wait, using a stratagem similar to that of the Trojan horse in the foreign story. And on the third occasion, he won. There are many examples of materialist dialectics in Shui Hui Shuan, of which this episode of the three attacks of Shu village is one of the best. That has to be the bill. Oh yeah, people were doing this. They were always materialist dialectics. They just didn't know it. Fuck you.
Intelligent pragmatism. It's not.
It's like fuck you, you goddamn.
Yeah, this is. I mean, it's good that they learned from their mistakes and considered more than one aspect, but
Yeah, it's just bullshit. That has nothing to do with Marxism. The fact that it
Yeah.
existed before doesn't mean anything. It just shows you what this is what smart people do. People with intellect who think and aren't dumb. So if you're not a dummy, you do good. See, you succeed.
think like your
You
enemy,
solve problems.
you might be able to find out their flaws. Well, obviously. I mean, it may not have been obvious to everyone at that time, but that's not
I don't know, man. I
dialectical or
I think it's been obvious for a long time.
yeah.
It has nothing to do with dialectics. I mean, it's basically contextual thinking. Are you aware of your surroundings? Yes, that's not a dialectical thing. That's literally you are an intelligent human being. And my dog is intelligent. He's aware that he's around, a place where he gets pets and belly rubs and food. And he knows that if he leaves, he's not going to get pets and belly rubs and food. So, he can go and wander around all day, but he'll come back home because he's a smart doggo. Is he a dialectician because of that? Because he knows the conditions of the possibility of belly rubs and food? No. He's just a very good dog. Lenin said, in order really to know an object, we must embrace, study all its sides, all connections and mediations. We shall never achieve this completely, but the demand for all-sidedness is safeguard against mistakes and rigidity. I agree. We should remember his words. To be superficial means to consider neither the characteristics of a contradiction in its totality nor the characteristics of each of its aspects. It means to deny the necessity for probing deeply into a thing and minutely studying the characteristics of its contradictions, but instead merely to look from afar and, after glimpsing the rough outline, immediately try to resolve the contradiction, to answer a question, settle a dispute, handle work, or direct military operation. This way of doing things is bound to lead to trouble. The reason the dogmatists and the empiricist comrades in China have made mistakes lies precisely in their subjectivist, one-sided, and superficial way of looking at things. To be one-sided and superficial is at the same time to be subjective. For all objective things are actually interconnected and are governed by inner laws, but instead of undertaking the task of reflecting things as they really are, some people only look at things one-sidedly or superficially, and who know neither the interconnections nor the inner laws, and so their method is subjectivist. Um, Agree, but again, it's not even talking about the things he's talking about. Like, there are no inner laws. When you talk about, look at the whole scenario of like World War II or even specific scenarios, there is no inner law to these things. That's why we actually need people to constantly reassess the situations. Because there is no actual law to the way war works. You have to play off what your enemy does, and your enemy likewise has to play off what you do. So it's always under question. You never have this certainty. When you have certainty, it's very rare and very, very great. And you have an overwhelming advantage. But in a fair war of equal strengths and equal intelligence, you don't get this, and it has nothing to do with inner laws. And you're trying to figure out all the factors, that you know of won't reveal any laws as to what you should do and what will guarantee victory. But it does help a ton. I mean, like what Mao said, that yeah, I'll just leave it there. We've already said enough about that. Continuing, not only does the whole process of movement of opposites and development of a thing, both in their interconnection and each of their aspects, have particular features to which we must give attention, but each stage in the process has particular features to which we must give attention to. Well, repeating that for God knows how many times. The fundamental contradiction in the process of development of a thing and the essence of the process determined by this fundamental contradiction will not disappear until the process is completed. But in a lengthy process, the conditions usually differ at each stage. The reason is that although the nature of the fundamental contradictions in the process of development of a thing and the essence of the process remain unchanged, the fundamental contradiction becomes more and more intensified as it passes from one stage to another in the lengthy process. In addition, among the numerous major and minor contradictions which are determined or influenced by the fundamental contradictions, some become intensified, some are temporally or partially resolved and mitigated, and some new ones emerged. Hence, the process is marked by stages. If people do not pay attention to the stages in the process of development of a thing, they cannot deal with its contradictions properly. Once again, I mean, I can't say I disagree, but I can't say I think he knows what he's really talking about. I mean, these just sound like formulaic things to me. I mean, it's formulaic versions of things that, even Hegel would say, but it's another thing to actually show this is the case. So, for example, the fundamental contradictions, the process of development of a thing, and the essence of the process determined by this fundamental contradiction. Will not disappear until the process is completed. Like, for example, what are you talking about when your thing is war? A specific war. What does it mean for the development of that war and the essence of that war to be the conflict determined by this fundamental contradiction will not disappear until the process is completed? Well, war won't be complete until the process of war is complete. Well, thank you. That's thank you, Mr. Analytic. The law of identities and tautologies are very helpful. Continuing, for instance, when the capitalism of the era of free competition developed into imperialism, there was no change in the class nature of the two classes in fundamental contradiction, namely the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, or in the capitalist essence of society. However, the contradiction between these two classes became intensified. The contradiction between monopoly and non-monopoly capital emerged, and the contradiction between the colonial powers and the colonies became intensified. The contradiction among the capitalist countries resulting from their uneven development manifested itself with particular sharpness, and thus there arose this special stage of capitalism, the stage of imperialism. Leninism is the Marxism of the era of imperialism and proletarian revolution, precisely because Lenin and Stalin have correctly explained these contradictions and correctly formulated the theory and tactics of the proletarian revolution for the resolution. And I would say to that Lenin wasn't exactly being dialectical in the Hegelian sense, but was going something along the lines of a trying to conceive of a necessary development from the given presuppositions of history. Given the things that we are given by the psychological natures and the logical natures of capitalism, we can expect something like imperialism to arise, especially when we have literally feudal imperialism still right behind it, and so it's not yet something which is seen by the rest of the world as unacceptable, or by the people themselves as unacceptable as it is seen today. So even then, it's still mostly pragmatic, and it's not a purely logical necessity. It is logical, by the way, but it is a contingent logic. So it's like your lover, for example, may be a nymphomaniac, and so you logically can deduce, obviously, that if you don't give him any, they're gonna go find some with somebody else. Usually, there's no like solid logic which determines it to be necessarily that way, but it's very likely. But that's not saying anything about sexuality in general, or you know for society at large. Hello, are you guys still here? Am I still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, just making sure I didn't cut
Yeah,
out like that
I'm
time with
still here.
Kawame.
No. I'm just letting you take center stage because I don't want to detract from finishing this section since it's long.
Alright, now some examples, it seems. Take the process of China's bourgeois democratic revolution, which began with the revolution of 1911. It too has several distinct stages. In particular, the revolution in its period of bourgeois leadership and the revolution in its period of proletarian leadership represent two vastly different historical stages. In other words, the proletarian leadership has fundamentally changed the whole face of the revolution. It has brought about new alignment of classes, given rise to tremendous upsurge in present revolution. In part, thoroughness of the revolution against imperialism and feudalism created the possibility of transition from the democratic revolution to the socialist revolution, and so on. Now, this was possible in the period when the revolution was under bourgeois leadership. Although no change has taken place in the nature of the fundamental contradiction in the process as a whole, that is, in the anti-imperialist, anti-feudal, democratic revolutionary nature of the process, the opposite of which is its semi-colonial and semi-feudal nature. Nonetheless, this process has passed through several stages of development in the course of more than 20 years. During this time, many great events have taken place: the failure of the revolution in 1911, and the establishment of the regimes of the northern warlords, the formation of the First National United Front in the revolution of 1924-27, the breakup of the United Front and the desertion of the bourgeoisie to the side of the counter-revolution, the wars among the new warlords, the agrarian revolution, the agrarian revolutionary war, the establishment of the Second National United Front and the War of Resistance against Japan. These stages are marked by particular features such as the intensification of certain contradictions, for example, the Agrarian Revolutionary War and the Japanese invasion of the four northeastern provinces, the partial or temporary resolution of other contradictions, for example, the destruction of northern warlords and our confiscation of the land of the landlords, and the emergence of yet other contradictions, for example, the conflicts among the warlords and the landlords' recapture of the land after the loss of revolutionary base areas in the south. In studying the particularities of the contradictions at each stage in the process of development of a thing, we must not only observe them in the interconnections totality, we must also examine the two aspects of each contradiction. For instance, consider the Kuomintang and the Communist Party. Take one aspect, the Kuomintang. In the period of the First United Front, the Kuomintang carried out Sun Yat-sen's three great policies of alliance with Russia, cooperation with the Communist Party, and assistance to the peasants and workers. Hence, it was revolutionary and vigorous. It was an alliance of various classes for the democratic revolution. After 1927, however, the Kuomintang changed into its opposite and became a reactionary bloc of the landlords and big bourgeoisie. After the Xi'an incident in December 1936, it began another change in direction to ending the civil war and cooperating with the Communist Party for joint opposition to Japanese imperialism, such have been the particular features of the Kuomintang in the three stages. Of course, these features have arisen from a variety of causes. Now I take other aspects of the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, we get it. I don't feel like reading the rest of this crap. At least for this paragraph.
Yeah.
Skipping this paragraph to the end, it can thus be seen that in studying the particularity of any kind of contradiction, the contradiction in each form of motion of matter, the contradiction in each of its processes of development. Tell me when the hell he's been talking about matter here. I mean, we've been talking about countries, we've been talking about armies, we've been talking about people. We haven't been talking about matter, have we?
No, but
It's this stupid metaphysical bullshit. I mean, like, I don't know, like you know what Josh was saying earlier. You know, it makes you seem high and mighty of like, oh, I'm talking about these unfathomable things. You know, this intellectual like elitism. You know, that you're talking about, you know, these grand universal scheme of things. When actually you're talking about normal common things that the normal person can understand. It has nothing special to it. There is no mystery. Like, there is no mystery to anything he said. Like, none of this. This has nothing to do with like some sort of like special logic. Literally, are you not a fucking moron? Then you can do these things.
I haven't learned a single thing from what he said.
Me
Either
neither.
like I've known it before, or like it's just fucking stupid.
Yeah, you know what it's like, and I've seen this. I'm writing a blog on this. Like I said, I mentioned someone earlier, a guy on Reddit called Smoke Up the Weed, literally takes things that are just completely normal. You can understand normally. You don't ever have to say it in any like weird language, in any weird form. Take something normal like bouncing a ball, playing basketball, and call it dialectical. And start talking about the contradiction of the ball in your hand and the ball on the floor and the matter in the ball and the matter of this floor and the air and the pressure within and the pressure outside. And it's like, oh, you know, it's like, see, comrades, you know, this is what dialectical thinking produces. If that's what dialectical thinking producing, it's ridiculous, it's useless, and by God, if anybody thinks this is worth it, please clear your mind of it, because you'll be better off without it.
That is the like epitome of. I hate the word pretentious, but that is pretentious.
Yeah, this is all pretentious. It's normal thinking. Like, none of this is special at all. This is nothing communist specific. This is literally, are you brain dead, moron? Yes, then maybe this is for you. Maybe you actually need somebody to explain obvious things in a non-obvious manner.
And by the way, I read that paragraph just in case anyone says, well, what we were wanting you to read was in that paragraph. No, it wasn't. So skipping it was not a bad thing.
In studying the particularity of these contradictions, we must not be subjective and arbitrary, but must analyze it concretely. Otherwise, look at your fucking world, people. Without concrete analysis, there can be no knowledge of the particularity of any contradiction or knowledge of what to practically do. That's what it really means. We must always remember Lenin's words, the concrete analysis of concrete conditions. Marx and Engels were the first to provide us with excellent models of such concrete analysis. No, they weren't.
No, not at all.
No, they weren't, because I can tell you Marx never fucking talks about this shit. Marx doesn't care about practicality of this sort. I mean, he does, by the way, he does. I'm not saying Marx like would have said, like, what are you talking about? You know, let's just sit in our armchairs like left communists do and like never talk about real things. No, you know, the stuff Mao's talking about is important. Don't fucking hang me for this. All I'm saying is Mao's talking about things that aren't specifically Marxist or Engelsian or even Leninist. It's just common practice, man. It's pragmatical problem solving. That's what it is. White people do it. Black people do it. Even retarded people do it. If you got a brain, you do it. To some capacity.
Okay.
My dog does it. I mean, it takes him a while. It takes him a while. I mean, you look into his eyes and like his quivering little mouth, and you know the little gears are turning and the neurons are firing at like God knows what speed like they go in whatever. But he's thinking. He's trying to solve it. He's thinking. It's like he's saying sit. He's like, what does that mean? I want the food. He's like, sit, sit, sit. Food. Ah, yes, sit. And then he finally sits down. And he's like, oh, my butt on the floor. That's what it means. food. It's dialectics, man. Dialectics. When Marx and Engels applied the law of contradictions in things to study the socio-historical process, Marx didn't. I can assure you of that. They discovered the contradiction between the productive forces and the relations to production. They discovered the contradictions between the exploiting and exploited classes, and also the resulting contradictions between the economic base and its superstructures. And they discovered how these contradictions inevitably lead to different kinds of social revolution, different kinds of social class society. That's not how that's not how Marx discovered it. I can tell you that much. Engels maybe, because Engels was always formulaic. He never quite got it. But Marx has no mechanical laws of dialectics whatsoever. You read his stuff. I mean, Marx just naturally does it because Marx was actually good at it. He didn't get at like the kinds of dialectics which I'm interested in, but he got at real ones. You know, the stuff he talks about, it's real. It's real contradictions, and not just like like Maoist contradictions of just like conflicts. No, they're contradictions in like the real sense of just like, wow, you do one thing and you also have done the opposite. It's a real unity of opposites, unlike Mao. Mao's are literally external. All of them, all the examples and the way he describes them are all external contradictions. They're not actually dialectical.
If my gun aims at Porky's head, it dialectically solves the problem.
Yes, it does. No Porky, no proletariat, no problem. When Marx applied this law to the study of the economic structures of capitalist society, he discovered that the basic contradiction of society is the contradiction between the social character of production and the private character of ownership. This contradiction manifests itself in the contradiction between the organized character of production in individual enterprise and the anarchist character of production society as a whole. In terms of class relations, it manifests itself in the contradiction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Okay, well, just paraphrasing Marx, can't screw that up. Good job, Mao. Because the range of things is vast and there is no limit to their development, what is universal in one context becomes particular in another. Conversely, what is particular in one context becomes universal in another. This is going on some like monistic tripes. Particularly, it has to do with chain of causes, basically. You can think about it as chain of causes as a chain, or in philosophical terms, sufficient reason. Everything has a context, and that context has a context. And you know what is a context here? Itself is just an object with another context there. It's not a great insight by Marxist mystics and intellectual mystics, both intuitionists, experientialists, and intellectualists, came up with that idea pretty damn early in human history. I mean, Jews, man. Jews and Kabbalah. The contradiction in the capitalist system between the social character of production and the private ownership of the means of production is common to all countries where capitalism exists and it develops. As far as capitalism is concerned, this constitutes the universality of contradiction. What? Oh, okay. So that's the unit. Okay, he says that the contradiction between the social character of production and social character of production and the private ownership of the means of production is a universal contradiction to capitalism. But this contradiction of capitalism belongs only to a certain historical stage in the general development of class society. As far as the contradiction between the productive forces related to production and class society as a whole is concerned, it constitutes the particularity of contradiction. However, in the course of dissecting the particularity of all these contradictions in capitalist society, Marx gave still more profound, more adequate, and more complete elucidation of the universality of contradiction between the productive forces and the relations of production in class society in general. And well, about the universality of contradiction about capitalism, by the way, he's wrong. That is not a universal contradiction of capitalism. Co-ops.
You're advocating co-ops now. Now Lefty Pole's gonna tear into you about that.
Well, no, I mean, fuck, even Marx says this, by the way. Like, Marx says, oh yeah, we could have a socialized capitalism. Haha.
Yeah.
Literally, you could have.
But
you could-
everyone in the thread's going to say co-ops are not socialism, and they're going to.
Well, I'm not saying they're socialism. I'm saying, like, when
Well,
he
yeah,
says
I
that the
know.
universality of contradictions, that there is a
I
social
know.
character production, a private ownership production, contradiction in capitalism. That's not true.
Yeah, it's not.
It's
But
not.
I
It's
just
not
wanted to
necessarily
clarify
inherent.
that you're not advocating for that necessarily, because people will assume that if you say it,
Oh, hey,
because they can't get it they can't see like where things are logical without us advocating for them.
yeah. Well, I mean, like, hey, I advocate co-ops as a practical, just betterment of my life. You know
Yeah.
how much better my life would be if I worked at a co-op.
But not as an end result.
Well, yeah, not
Yeah.
as an end result, but like,
Yeah.
Mao's not talking about that kind of stuff either. He's being a pragmatist.
I know.
Like, all of this is not about. He's not talking about end results at all. He's like, in this specific situation, we got to do this. In that specific situation, we got to do that. Well, yeah, great. In this specific situation, I sure would like to work at a co-op, because I'd be making a lot more money. Like, here we have a food co. It's not a co-op like, like workers own the place, but like workers get a share of the company. So they own it by shares. So they get a share in the company when they get hired, and you start out at literally $17 an hour, and the minimum wage right here is $10. $17 an hour to push around fucking carts and stock shelves, man. I'd take that. There's a fucking donut factory here in California, like North California somewhere. I think like 40 people work there, and they work their usual 40 hours a week, but they're not overworked or anything. Each one makes $40 an hour. Because, they share the profits equally. All of them own it equally. You telling me that's not good for my life? Fuck you. You goddamn armchair sitting left com. I want my co-ops and I want them now.
Yeah, it's just stupid. It's like, oh, co-ops aren't socialism.
Well, I don't give a
Yeah,
fuck.
they're
I
still
want.
good. Yeah, I know. They're
I want
still
a better
good. I
life.
would rather be in a co-op.
Yeah, I don't give a fuck if they're socialists or not. Like, they make my life better right now. I will take it. Like,
Do
that's
I
like
want socialism? Like
it's
genuine
like
socialism?
yeah,
Yeah,
I want that.
but like co-ops are fine. I can have co-ops.
It's like winning the lottery, man. It's like, you win the lottery and it's like $500 million. You're just like, but if I take that, I will be the capitalist. I can't do that. You're a moron if you don't.
Yeah.
Like the doggy coin guy. Apparently the guy who invented doggy coin was a socialist, and he got offered
You mean
$200,000. Yeah. I don't know how people.
It's pronounced Doge.
Right.
Nobody knows how it's pronounced,
Okay.
Josh.
No,
It's
it's
a
pronounced
fake
Doge.
No.
All right. Let's
People
not argue about the
pronounce
semantics of
it.
memes.
People pronounce it both as doggy and doge. People who are like the extreme memesters pronounce it as doge. People who are
It's
more
GIF.
normies. All right. Since the particularity is united with the universal, and since the universality as well as the particularity contradiction is inherent in everything, universality residing in particularity, we should, when studying an object, try to discover both the particular and universal and their interconnection, discover both the particularity and universality and also their interconnection within the object itself, to discover the interconnection of this object with the many objects outside. He said the same thing like 3 times in 3 different ways. And not very different ways either. And he said this already, God knows how many times.
Make your book look theoretical. It's got to be extra pages.
He's like a broken record.
I am eyeing like the end of that paragraph, and I don't think there's anything new, so I'm going to skip it. On the question of using dialectics in the study of objective phenomena, Marx and Engels, and by the way, once again, he never explained the connection of universality and particularity and how you actually go from one to the other. Oh, well, except he did, but he did it wrong because it doesn't actually work that way. Because if you think that you're going to generalize to universal and then just like start with generalization and go to the particulars, you're a moron. It's literally a contradiction within the logic, literally in Hegel's logic, called the contradiction of the practical and the theoretical. And one tries to get the other, and the other tries to get the other, and they, from each side, they can't connect. if you take them as in the way that Mao takes it. On the question of using dialectics in study of objective phenomena, Marx and Engels, and likewise Lenin and Stalin, always enjoined people not to be in any way subjective and arbitrary, but from the concrete conditions, the actual objective movement of these phenomena, to discover these concrete contradictions, the concrete positions of each aspect of each contradiction, the concrete interrelations of contradictions. So Mao's here is talking about historical, empirical objectivity. Whereas when we're from the Hegelian logical standpoint, objectivity is not this. He would actually call Mao a subjectivist, because Mao is not getting at the real essence of things. Mao's getting at the superficial. It just happens to be essence of things, which is not actually essential, which is exactly why it's called contingent history, because there's nothing essential about it, nothing that necessitates it. It just is what it is because that's just how it is. Could have been that, I could have had some other dog, but I have this dog.
But what's the point?
And, what's the point? Our dogmatists do not have this attitude in study and therefore can never get anything right. Well, they must be, literally brain dead. That's all I can say, if your dogmatists are this brain dead, boy, you need some, to up your quality requirements for entering the party. We must take warning from their failure and learn to acquire this attitude, which is the only correct one in study. The relationship between the universality and particular contradictions, okay, fine, you're repeating yourself.
We're almost at the end.
This truth concerning general individual character, concerning absoluteness, relativity, is the quintessence of the problem of contradiction in things. Failure to understand it is tantamount to abandoning dialectics. Well, thank you, Mao. You made my point. You don't understand dialectics. And anybody who comes in the fucking comments, fuck you. Don't talk to me if you haven't read Hegel. Don't talk to me if you haven't read Hegel.
You're going to make a comment, fuck you.
Yeah, don't talk. Yeah, fuck you.
Don't talk to me or my son ever again.
Don't at me.
Don't talk to me in my dialectics ever again.
I want people to comment.
Well, no, okay. I don't want
challenges.
Yeah, if they have genuine challenges, but don't come at me. It's like you don't understand Mao. I don't give a shit what Mao says. Frankly, I don't care about Mao's ideas.
I understand Mao. He's not that great of a thinker. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is not complex stuff. I get what he's saying. People say you don't get what he's saying. No, I get what he's saying.
Yeah, there's no hidden meaning here. There's no underlying.
The thing is, I don't think this is. It's not. I don't think. Okay,
context.
I'm not. Let me rephrase it. I know this is not dialectics of the kind that he wants to appeal to. He's appealing to the greatness of Hegel. He's appealing to the greatness of Marx. This is not Marxist dialectics. If you look at capital and you know how capital works, this is not how it works. Not at all. Absolutely not at all. You want to challenge me on that? Bring it, okay? I'll answer to that. Definitely. I'll show you the difference. But if you come here, it's well, you don't understand it. No, it's very clear what he's saying from the Hegelian standpoint. To whoever told me that he's a Hegelian, you are so wrong. It's not funny.
He mentions Hegel, though.
Yeah, he mentions Hegel. That's about it.
Hegel. He's Hegelian.
The contradictions he's talking about, not Hegelian dialectics. They're not imminently necessary contradictions. They are not logical necessary contradictions. When he says this truth concerning general and individual character, concerning absoluteness and relativity, is the quintessence of the problem of contradictions in things, he never explained the connection of the universal and the individual characters of dialectics. He mentioned them. He mentioned the two ways of looking at them. He never explained how you go from one to the other. At all. He just says it. And, for the person who said it in my last video, he's well, he's talking about other things that other people talked about. I don't care. Because I assume this was supposed to be an explanatory piece. Because if you're writing something to enlighten your comrades, you should explain things.
Nah, this isn't an explanatory piece. I think he just wrote this to rise to power in the Communist Party, just to seem like he's a smart dude because he says something dialectics, Hegel, universality, contradiction. Oh, look, I'm smart.
Yeah, I mean, none
Just
of
for
this is
the
explained. It's formalistic, and I don't know if I don't know if I agree with you, Josh, but I won't say anything about the psychology or the personality of Mao, but I'll just say definitely, whoever said he was a Galian, you're full of shit. Whoever comes at me going like, well, you're misinterpreting Mao. I don't give a shit.
How? What's there to misinterpret? It's so straightforward.
It is, so I don't give a shit. So if you comment, if you get this far, I'm not responding. I'm not taking the bait. But yeah, okay. This is enough. I think I don't want to read any of this. I'm done.
All right.
We've
Yeah.
read.
Well, it was good while it lasted. I'll
Dude, we
read.
gave him. We gave him the
Yeah, we
times.
did.
There's
I'll
nothing
read
here.
the rest. If there's anything worth noting, I'll let you know.
I doubt it. Especially because the principal contradiction and the principal aspect in the prime contradiction and the secondary contradictions is not a dialectical thing. It's totally pragmatic. I could have told you.
He's speaking against his own party members as well.
Yeah. But I mean, nothing to do with dialectics. This has nothing to do with anything that nobody normal doesn't know. Mao hasn't elucidated anything that I didn't already know. I knew this before I ever encountered Marx. I knew this before I even encountered philosophy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
okay.
just
I should
normal.
clarify. He's not. I'm not saying like it's a diatribe against them. I'm saying it's more of like a enlightening the peasants type thing. So there's hardly anything that we're going to get out of this, having read Marx himself, Hegel himself, and so on.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if like he has any more philosophical works.
No, not really. I mean,
I
not
doubt
the
it.
quotations.
I doubt it. I mean, I don't
I'm
expect it
just
because he wasn't a philosopher. So I'm not saying like wow, Mao is an idiot. No, the stuff he said so far was smart. It's intelligent. It's not
It's
stupid at
just
all.
not anything that we haven't considered before.
Yeah,
And
basically that.
also, I mean, yeah, the
It's
guy
also
in
not
the
unique.
on the last video. Well, yeah, but the uniqueness doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he comes up with anything new. But as the guy said in the comments, he's not a philosopher.
Exactly. So I mean, I'm not judging him as I am judging him from a philosophical standpoint because somebody said he was, and it is because of that
Yeah.
I read this. So like as far as judging him, the person is revolutionary. I hold my judgment because I don't know anything, much about revolutionary China and what went on. So I'll leave that to other people who are more knowledgeable. And
Did he
one day
empirically improve China? Sure.
yeah.
Of
He
course.
also fucked up a lot of things.
Yeah. We can't deny that there was progress, but yeah, did he do what we would want him to have done? No, of course not.
I mean, like I was reading something like apparently he tried to apply Lysenkoism. Huge fuck up of like imposing dialectics where they don't belong. Pseudo dialectics at that. But anyways, I'm personally done with this. I'm not going to read any further. Pirion says he'll read it and see if there's anything else. But yeah, whoever you are on Lefty Pole who said he was a Galen, fuck you for wasting my time. You made me waste like 2 hours of my life.
Top troll.
I can't. Yeah. Top troll. God tier. But I enjoyed it. It wasn't too bad.
It's fun to do. All right, thank you for
All right. Thanks for listening. If you listen.
through all of that.
All right, we're done. Heading out.
Goodbye.
bye.